financial reform. President Obama is shortly going to be signing a sweeping reform of financial regulation. You said last week that unless significant changes were made in that legislation that you'd be uncomfortable with it becoming law, in part because these new consumer protections, in your view, would reduce lending. But my question is, if everybody's following the rules, why would you expect there'd be less financial activity than before?
Well, first of all, it's quite apparent that if you're making more stringent rules, and I'm not against it, I think that's the right thing to do, you are restricting the amount of credit. We have not had a single subprime mortgage loan since January 2008. That market at the moment is dead. I mean, I've always thought it was very useful to have what turned out to be a very small but very effective subprime market until securitization took hold in 2004. And it expanded minority home ownership, and I thought that was all to the good. That has now come to a dead halt. There are a lot of loans made currently by the banking system which are marginal. These loans will be eliminated, and those marginal loans are largely the lower credit risks, lower income groups, and people who before would be going to pawnbrokers. I don't think that's necessarily a good trend.
Can this consumer agency be truly independent if it's housed inside the Federal Reserve?
I don't know, but there's a much broader question here which relates to this, and that's when we in fact do not know what the consequence of this legislation is going to be. And the reason an inordinately large part of it relegates to the regulators, empowers them to make all sorts of rules on the principles put forward in the legislation. That is a very broad discretionary range. And I can go read through the 2,000 plus pages, which I haven't done. And I'll learn a lot about what the act is about. That will tell me a lot less than you might imagine as to what it actually is mandating, because until you get a regulation essentially promulgated by the individual regulators who are empowered to do so, you have no idea what the impact's going to be.
Do you believe this reform legislation leaves the Fed stronger or weaker?
Well, it leaves it slightly weaker. It leaves in the sense of its structure. And I was very concerned early on when there was discussion of taking away the supervisory authorities of the so-called community banks in this country, or some of the community, I should say, some of the community banks. I thought that would have been a very bad mistake. They didn't do that. And the type of structural changes they made in the nature of the Federal Reserve banks is minimal. I would prefer they didn't do it, but overall, I would say it's a wash. Strangely, the additional power that the Fed has been given, I have not been in favor of. I don't think they can actually prevent the next crisis. What the mistake fundamentally in a regulatory structure was is we misjudged the amount of capital financial institutions needed to have to meet the provision for losses. If we had adequate capital, Lehman Brothers would not have failed. I mean, if they had, for example, 15% capital instead of 3%, and if Bear Stearns had similar numbers, they would have lost a great deal of money, but it's their shareholders who would have lost the money, not their debt, not their lenders. It's what causes contagion is default of debt. And if you have adequate capital, by definition, you prevent that.
Quick follow. Do you think banks today are adequately capitalized?
No, I do not. By that I mean that they're not lending freely, and the reason they're not lending freely is they don't believe they're going to get their money back. And what that is essentially saying is that until you get capital up, in my judgment, a couple of percentage points more than it is at least, you're going to find that banks are not going to feel sufficiently free to lend. And there's two concepts here which I think is important to recognize. One is regulatory capital, the other is what the market requires. The market right now is requiring more than they actually have.